Welcome to this edition of Cup of Joe on Recharge as part of the TT Magazine event series. My name is Joe Howard. I'm the executive editor here at TT, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Seth Clevenger, managing editor for features, and Michael Freeze, features editor. And we are talking about EVs, but not about the trucks and the deployment, which is something that we dedicate a lot of coverage to, and rightfully so, because this is something that is coming, and every single fleet is going to have to figure it out in one way or another how it's going to work for their operation. But the people who are really going to understand the nuts and bolts of it, almost literally, in the case of service technicians, are service technicians and the drivers. These are the people who are going to be bringing the feedback to the fleet managers, to the owners of these companies, in some cases, saying, "Hey, here's what works. Here's what doesn't." I mean, the boots on the ground perspective is the one that's really valuable in this slow but almost unavoidable, I would say, rollout of electric vehicles in the commercial market. I mean, Michael, I'll start with you. What do we think, or what are we already hearing in terms of the key issues that are going to face technicians in terms of learning how to and then working on these electric trucks in these commercial applications?
Well, hey Joe, good question. One of the things that the this situation we'll call is kind of two facets. One being the buy-in with the technicians. With most technicians working on internal combustion engines, there's some sort of buy-in that has to take place when it comes to working on electric vehicles and attending to their maintenance. And Taki Takaris from Pitt, Ohio, brought up a really good point. And just bringing in that buy-in, because as we're all excited about the future of electric vehicles, there may be some that are just that have been in that ice age. I mean, no pun intended, for quite some time. And having that buy-in to work on electric vehicles, I mean, that some people might not want to be a part of that. Some people might just want to stay with diesel until their working days are done. I mean, that's just the realities that we have right now and on the ground. So once we kind of have to go through that, and I think every fleet and every particular truck fleet, automotive service is going through that right now. Just kind of seeing that wave coming, and whether or not they want to get wet or not, basically. So you have that point, and the second thing of all this too is the training involved. What will that look like? What would that instill? Is that more battery maintenance? Because the battery will be the main component of the electric vehicle. So there's going to be education on that, and there's going to be a lot of nuance concerning that. I mean, mostly right now, most of the public right now, when it comes to EV maintenance, are thinking it's just kind of take one bad part and order that other part and replace it with replace that new one with the old one. I'm sorry, the old one with the new one.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of education that needs to go into that, and the OEMs on their part have been helpful, and just assisting in that, when in preparation for that particular time. I mean, right now there's not a big flood of demand for education when it comes to electric vehicles, when you still have a large vast of diesel vehicles running on the road. But that particular planning and the buy-in of it, of that, here is the future. Do you want to be a part of it? And then on the
Mhm.
second hand, that education. How can these technicians be more efficient with this new technology that's coming?
Seth, one of the things that we've seen in fairly recent years in terms of a technological shift, not necessarily under the hood, but inside the cab, is ELDs. So, and here you had it's kind of the same case where we're taking something of a legacy product, right? Logbooks, and replacing it with ELDs, and the educational rush that had to occur there. It was different in a way because it was regulatory mandate that was coming versus this is going to be a much more of a slow roll. But in your experience, what is the secret sauce for getting buy-in, as Michael says, and also the training? It came down to training drivers in the case of ELDs, but it's also training the people who have to work on them. So it's different, but the hurdles are arguably very similar.
Yeah, Joe, to your point, there's a lot to learn here. I mean, this is really a learning process for the whole industry. We're still in the very early days of the very first wave of electric vehicles in the trucking industry. So this is really new to everyone, just about everyone. And technicians need to learn how to work on these vehicles. Don't forget the truck dealers are going to have to understand the vehicles, how to work, with their customers, their fleet customers, to roll this out successfully and support it. Because I think it's fair to say that the early adopters are going to rely fairly heavily on those dealers, especially in the early days as they start to ramp this up and learn this new technology. I don't know if there is a secret sauce to to getting that buy-in that ultimately will be needed. But I think that if you keep in mind that the rollouts are going to be relatively targeted, in the early days, we're going to be looking at very specific applications, short haul, maybe port drayage, uh, types of duty cycles and applications that are well suited to electric vehicles. And that's not everything, right? I mean, a long haul over the road truck is going to be diesel for quite some time until there are other products on the market that makes sense for that type of operation. So uh, we target it to those applications that are most relevant to the technology. That does limit the scope a little bit, but certainly some technicians are going to have to learn this. In theory, the job actually becomes a little bit easier because there are fewer moving parts with a electric vehicle compared to a diesel. Um, so I'll be interested to see how that plays out over time with some of the early adopters, what they're really seeing as they accumulate many miles in the field. Uh, but to some extent, the job becomes easier. But I don't want to also downplay that because it's also a lot of new technology and a lot of a lot to learn for the specific dealers, the specific terminals that are going to be working on this.
And when we talk about the early adopters, we do hear anecdotally at trade shows and and people we talk to in the course of our work that drivers like these things. They're quieter, and once you kind of learn to modulate the accelerator and you learn how to use the thing, it's kind of cool. I mean, Michael, are we hearing anything in terms of incentivizing drivers or technicians to be the ones who are on the forefront? I mean, what is it going to take to draw in those early adopters? Because you mentioned some of the folks who may be longer in their career, like, listen, I'm not learning something new.
Yeah.
But maybe somebody who is younger in their career, or somebody who's, say, mid-career, saying, hey, hang on a second, I want to be on the cutting edge of this. I mean, what are we hearing in terms of incentivizing folks to jump on board?
You're sort of hearing that latter part, Joe, with the just those that are interested. I mean, be it the young people, and there are technicians, the old school technicians that are more than happy to be on board with this and to learn
Mhm.
something new as well. So let's not exclude those
Right,
guys and
sure.
gals as well. But I think it's the latter part of what you were just saying with just those wanting to be on the cusp of something new, and as Seth had alluded to earlier, there has been some small strategic implementations of EVs, especially as he said, with the short haul in that in that last mile areas in cities like Houston and Atlanta and just other metro areas that have incorporated some sort of electric vehicles into their short mile process. UPS comes to mind when we think of things
Mhm.
like that. So, having that basic maintenance and that incentive, I think the incentive lies into being on the front of that particular technology. Now, as for company incentives, I don't necessarily know if that's going to take if that's going to take part. But I think on a large scale, possibly, through government regulations and other government initiatives, where they will give businesses some type of advantage if they incorporate EV into their fleet.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's a particular moment where we'll have to watch that space.
Sure. And it's funny you mentioned that because, somewhat off topic, but that the same thing is going on behind the scenes on the autonomous front. Like, you're working with government leaders now to kind of get get those who are in charge ready for the notion of, hey, these trucks might, someday, before we know it, be driving down the road without somebody behind the wheel. We also have to kind of get, state and federal, lawmakers on board with, hey, look, everybody wants a zero emissions future, but, Seth, let's talk about, the brass tacks of this. These trucks are expensive. The return on investment has to be there. So everybody is supportive of zero emissions operation, but the dollars and cents have to make sense. And I mean, do you think that it's going to take some kind of regulatory push, like a significant one, to say, look, here are the breaks that that fleets will get for bringing these fairly expensive pieces of equipment into their operation?
Well, I certainly think that government incentives are going to be important to this in the early days, for sure. The Inflation Reduction Act did include some significant, credits for EV commercial vehicles, electric commercial vehicles. So there's an example of that at the federal level, and of course, as we know, California is making a big push on the regulatory side to, um, you know, they have regulation, a forthcoming regulation that would require increasing percentage sales of battery electric trucks in the state, from the OEMs, and they're working on a similar requirement for fleet operators in the state. So, it's there is that regulatory push, as well as some incentives. But yes, at the end of the day, this has to be commercially viable. This has to provide a return on investment for the fleet operators for it to truly succeed in the marketplace. So that is the challenge moving forward. It is a very large upfront cost, upfront investment. Well, it's the purchase price of the vehicle is, you know, significantly higher than a diesel truck. Of course, it depends on the specs and the exact nature of what you're doing. So I want to throw a price out there per se, but uh, certainly quite a bit more. And there's a lot of complexity that goes into this. And we talk about the government side, but a lot of this right now is falling on the utilities and the power companies. I mean, there are fleets that are early adopters that want to kind of get ahead of this. They've rolled out some vehicles. They want to scale it up in certain terminals. Maybe in California, for example, where there is that big regulatory push. But the power company is not ready to support it, right? There's not the there's that's the holdup in some cases. And it can be a matter of maybe a few years before that's ready to go. So there's a lot of different elements here that need to come together for an electric fleet operation. It's the vehicle is one part. We're talking about the maintenance, and that's in house and at the dealer. The dealer needs to know how to support it. The infrastructure needs to be there, including utilities, power companies, and yeah, there's of course there's the government side that's offering incentives, and in some cases regulatory regulatory push to nudge the industry pretty strongly in that direction in certain states. So a lot of complexity. But at the end of the day, again, it comes back to return on investment. It has to make business sense. If it's not going to pay for itself, the trucking companies won't be viable. So, the government regulators need to understand that. Everybody in this whole, all the stakeholders involved need to understand that. This has to be something that really makes sense commercially, for fleet operators. And that could include, the shippers as well. I mean, I should mention them. They're another huge stakeholder as well. And some of these large shippers are pushing in this direction.
Right.
And, they want to see, ways to reduce their carbon footprint, and meet their, sustainability pledges. And a big part of that is their supply chain and the transportation network. So they are looking to their trucking partners to help them meet that. So something that maybe doesn't make sense purely from a dollars and cents standpoint, when you look at the operating costs, might make sense if a shipper is willing to support that. If you're going to win more business with a major shipper, if you're going to keep a shipper customer, a major customer, by doing this, that could change your calculations, how you think about rolling out this technology. And also, I think that the flip side of that is the shippers who want to move in this direction, ought to be supportive of it, right? And maybe that means paying a little bit more. And it's not always easy to go green. So the shippers should do their part, I think, as well, and not just put it on the trucking company. That's really kind of uh, blazing a new trail here with this new technology.
And you really hit on something there, Seth, because it's the charging infrastructure that is a big challenge, right? One of the biggest challenges. And it's not like putting up a mailbox. I mean, putting up one of these charging stations
No.
is a major undertaking. And it gets back to the utility company, and it gets back to permitting and all of the red tape and all of the stuff that nobody thinks about when we're saying going green, we're setting this target for. That's great and admirable, but the devil is in the details. And I mean, I took a trip to Las Vegas, as a guest of Daimler Truck North America, myself and some other North American media. And DTNA President John O'Leary said that it's the infrastructure that is holding back further EV adoption. I mean, he said that he's had customers who'd say, "I'd buy more if I could charge them."
Yeah.
So it comes down to government, and I think you're really hitting on something there, Seth, because could a shipper say, "Hey, I will help you defray some of these costs to set up 4 charging stations at a distribution center"? Pick a number. I mean, if you've got a long-term contract with a shipper, can they negotiate? Hey, the shipper has these sustainability goals and they're admirable, and the carrier does as well. Well, let's come together and and make it happen from a financial standpoint by saying we're going to share the burden and the cost of installing a charging infrastructure. I mean, Michael, are you hearing, as editor of Calibrate, what are the people you're talking to saying about the challenges of the charging infrastructure for EVs?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that's a very interesting question, Joe. As Seth was saying, you can throw shippers into the equation, and then you have I keep on alluding to this phrase, you have so many known unknowns going on just with the shippers. But one particular piece that we haven't talked about is the truck stops. That's the TAs and the loves of the world. They are they're going to be players in this as well. And as you said, this is not like putting up a post box, a mailbox, but it's not like putting up it's not like putting a gas pump in there as well. So that whole dynamic of just the charging mechanism, as before, you have a diesel truck, you go to a gas station, you get gas, and you move on. But now with EVs, you have the point of recharge could be at that particular gas station, or it could be at a warehouse, it could be at a particular place where the fleets are delivering their goods. I mean, the trucks are delivering their goods. So that's a whole different playing field when you're thinking about how the truck stops are going to play out in this. And just from speaking with some representatives from from those entities, there's a lot of talk about the truck stop of the future, where
Mm-hmm.
for instance, TA is already partnering with a third party to have sort of those self-charging stations at their truck stops right now. So I mean they're definitely getting into the game. But as it plays to a large scale where you're charging a Class 8 truck, that's another can of worms that you want to get into, because we already have a problem with truck parking already. And then when you have truck stops, wanting to make plans to install recharge stations in those already crowded truck stops. The cause for some problems. So there's a lot of people that are just sort of kind of I wouldn't say nervous, but they're excited to implement the EV infrastructure technology and everything that comes with it. But I mean, is that going to be a golden age for the future, or is that going to lead to more problems that are on top of those truck parking problems already? So you have that dynamic to deal with. But the future moves on whether we like it or not. So these problems are going to probably be dealt with when that time comes.
And Seth, one of the other tricky things I think we'll be facing is standardization of some of this technology and standardization of the charging portals. And we're still in the early stages of this, do we think we're going to find ourselves? I mean, I know Tesla has their own charging hookup, for example. But do you think we're going to have to find ourselves in a situation where sooner rather than later we're going to have to standardize and settle on some very foundational things so that these things work across
Yeah.
multiple pieces of equipment and work reliably?
Yeah, you probably don't want to have a ecosystem develop where you need charger X for your E Cascadia and charger Y for your VNR electric, and another one for your Peterbilt, and another for international. That's that's no good for really anybody. It's not going to help this market that's going to emerge over time. So there is some work by the OEMs to work on some standardization that I think will be important. Um, I and I want to kind of touch back on Michael's point about sort of this build out of the infrastructure. Uh, I think that that's also going to happen over time. The early adopters now are really focused on kind of return to home type operations. So really, these trucking companies are turning some of their locations and terminals into EV terminals, which means they are the charging station for their own fleet. Again, a lot of complexity for that, but maybe working with a shipper or a warehousing provider to have charging on the other end of a repeatable route, for example, might make sense in the near term. And then over time, further as this further builds out, is when I think we'll see the truck stops start to, in certain corridors, especially. Okay, how do we support this new type of vehicle that we're seeing on the road more and more? So the truck stops do have some time, but it's amazing how fast this, how much time it takes to do this, and that's a real challenge because you do have to think ahead pretty far. And one of the best pieces of advice I've heard from some of the early adopters is to start that conversation early
Mm-hmm.
with your power company, with the utilities as you start to do this. Maybe roll out just a very small number of vehicles to understand them, to understand their characteristics, to get a sense of what your power demands will be, as you want to scale up. And you can communicate that with your power company or your utility that's supporting a certain facility, and they can be ready for it sooner. So it's not, waiting for years, for that capability to come online so you can expand your fleet. So that really is, and really can be the holdup for some of the early adopters right now.
And there's I have to say there's probably a silver lining to this slow rollout because we probably, we and I say the industry needs that time. They need that time to build up that power infrastructure. They need that time for the early adopters to learn how these things work. So I think, probably the hope is that all of this is happening concurrently, right? We'll build up some power infrastructure. We'll learn something about how the trucks work. And then, over time, all of the, all hopefully, this rising tide floats all boats kind of idea, all of that information will sort of coalesce and help that next drive forward, and help operators and help drivers and help technicians all, better understand how to make these things work. No new technology is something is going to be learned overnight. It's amazing to think how many years we are into SCR systems. That still feels like it was yesterday morning. But but over time, I do think these things settle in. So I suppose the hope is that over time, and of course reading transport topics and calibrate and watching these shows, that folks will learn more and more about them and learn more and more about how they can work in a fleet operation. So with that, I will wrap up this edition of Cup of Joe, and I will thank my guests, features editor Michael Fries and managing editor for features Seth Clevenger, for their input and expertise. My name is Joe Howard, executive editor at TT, and we thank you for watching.
Yeah. It is what it is. Um, okay. Zodiac, probably. Yeah. Well, I don't see that on my interface at all. I'm not seeing waveforms for anybody anywhere. It does actually. I'm having the same issue. It looks like I'm seeing, three talking heads. I have your chat box, hi, and I've got three. I guess one for you too as well. Four sort of trays with for each person. I don't know what you guys are doing. No.